Welcome to the Recovery Toolkit podcast. I'm Richie. I'm going to be your host. Throughout the series, we're going to talk to a range of different people who will give you tools and tips to help manage your recovery. The podcast itself is being brought to you by Epic Restart Foundation, who are a national charity who support people to rebuild a positive life after gambling harm. So today on the Recovery Toolkit podcast, I'm joined by Jenny Bryson. Jen, I'm so excited to have you on. And the reason being is on Dot's podcast that we done a while ago, she spoke about you. And since then I've thought, I want to know a little bit more about Jen. I want to know that story because I think from what I do know about it, it's very inspiring. You know, where you've come from to where you've got to now and the journey you've been on. I think it just offers so much hope and inspiration for people. So that's why I've asked you to come on. And yeah, let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up getting into recovery.
So my recovery journey started when I got caught drink driving for the second time. And my parents were accessing a service at the time, getting support for themselves because they just didn't know what to do with me anymore. And that service said to my parents, do you think Jen would meet us? Do you think she'd allow us to come and see her? And so they turned up at my door and they told me about the support that was available and they said recovery was possible. And they helped me start to access some of that stuff. What I was told was if I didn't stop drinking when I went to court for the drink driving offence, I would go to prison. And so I decided that this was a better option than prison, and I listened to them and I did as I was told. They got me medication to stop me withdrawing, and they got me in the right place at the right time, and that's kind of where it all started.
So, and I always say to people, you know, like in every situation, you've got to find the positive, haven't you? So had you not been caught drink driving, you might not have got into recovery at that moment in time, and it might have been down a different path. So, you know, look for the positive.
100%,
you know, and that's been quite a journey, hasn't it? You know, what was the services that you got? What was the support services like at the very early days?
So I think before the service that my parents were dealing with got involved, what I was offered prior to that was one session every 2 weeks where I'd be asked to fill out a drink diary. They would leave the session, or I would leave the session, and I would fill it out in one go. I would get drunk, I'd fill it out and put it on my mantelpiece and think there it is for when they come back in 2 weeks. There was very little truth in it. And because I'd said I didn't want to do groups, that's all that was on offer. And then when Liberty from Addiction got involved, they took me to the GP and got me some medication. They got me a social work support worker from the services rather than a normal coordinator. And they offered me rehab, which is something that I was desperate to do. It's something that I'd searched for prior to that. About a year before I got into recovery, I went to the doctors and just begged for help. And they said there was no rehabs unless you had the money to pay private, which me or my family didn't have that. So they offered me rehab. But there was a waiting list. So while I was waiting for rehab, they got me into this daycare centre. It was called DRAW, Durham Recovery and Wellbeing, full of people who'd managed to achieve abstinence from recovery. And I started to go there, and at first it was so scary. So my social worker had to get the bus with me because I was petrified of public transport. And she came with me the first few times and introduced me to some people there. And that's kind of where it all started. There was all sorts of support going on in that service. It was really holistic. There was Reiki, there was yoga, there was computer support, there was cooking on a budget, meals together. It was just connection with the people I needed to connect with.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing little community that was, you know, there for you. Yeah. I think something you mentioned there, I was just scared to get on the bus. Mm-hmm. I was scared. And a lot of people, when they hear addiction, there's a lot of stigma and shame attached to addiction, but actually not a lot of people realise how much it actually affects your life, you know. And what was it that was stopping you getting on the bus, do you think?
So there was a lot of things going around with that. So there is the shame. So when I first got into recovery, I hated every part of who I was, and I was trying to live a life without a substance that I'd used for a very long period of time, and the world was scary. I'd had some really traumatic experiences through my addiction, and The world was scary, people were scary, and I didn't like who I'd become. I didn't know how to show up in the world in a space of being substance-free.
Yeah, and that's an important message, that I think. And once we stop the coping strategy that we've used to deal with life, everybody thinks life's going to be rosy, straightforward, but actually gets a little bit more difficult sometimes, doesn't it? Because, like you say, you've got to face life, and you've got to face yourself. You've got to stand in the mirror. And 99% of the people I've worked with, when they enter recovery, they don't like the version of themselves that they see, and they've got to go and do some work.
Yeah. And there was lots of work, and that's still ongoing to this day.
Yeah, and it is, isn't it? It's a journey.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a journey. What was the work in the early days, Jen? Tell us about, once you got into, you joined the groups and you could become part of that community. What else was going on for Jen then? Talk us through the early days.
So in the first few months of recovery, so I was a few months, I'd managed to get to a few months sober by the time I got to Access Draw. And a little bit later, I did get offered rehab. However, I'd only just got my children back in my life when I was offered rehab, so I decided it wasn't the right time to do that. So I stuck it out at Draw. So I was a few months sober by the time I'd accessed that and was into going to services. It was a few months after that in passing in a corridor, one of the workers had asked me the right question at the right time, and I literally fell to my knees and I burst out crying, and I can feel it. And I said, you know what? No matter how much I look at myself in the mirror and tell myself that I'm okay, I'm not. I'm not okay. I want to drink every day. I hate the person that I am. I hate what I've done to my friends and family, and I can't live like this. And the worker at the time said to me, you need a meeting. And so he took me to a 12-step meeting. He took me to my first 12-step meeting the next day. And I went into the meeting, and it was an all-male meeting, and I'd had some really bad experiences with males. So I came out of that meeting and I hated my worker for doing it. How dare he take me to that meeting? Like, that was horrendous. But actually, after I'd calmed down about it, and on the night I was processing what that had looked like, there was about 20 men in that room, some of which who had been heroin addicts, cocaine, crack. They'd been to prison. They had lived what I would have classed as a really extreme life. And yet they were sat in the room laughing and joking. And I thought, you know what, there's something in that. Maybe that's not the meeting for me. However, maybe there's something in the programme. So I did SMART through the centre that I went to. I did all of the holistic programmes, and then I started to go to 12-step meetings on a night. And I tried them all, and I did on a night time. So I was also diagnosed with insomnia prior to getting into recovery. So I had very long nights. I would go to the centre during the day. I would go to 12-step meetings on a night. If I got home before 9 o'clock while the shops were still open, I would go to my sister's house. She would keep me safe until 10 o'clock, till all the shops in the village that I live in had shut. And then I would go home and I would pace the floors. I would write books. I would do Sudoku. I would bake. I would do absolutely anything to get me through that night, to get me to 8 o'clock the next morning where I could get the bus and go out again.
Yeah, and they're the things that people don't see, isn't it? The measures you have to go to sometimes just to keep yourself safe, and I think I've spoke a lot about 12-step recovery on the podcast, and sometimes it is just somewhere that you're safe, isn't it? It's, sometimes you get a lot more from that, but actually in my early days, it was just, I knew for that hour and a half, I was safe. And it also gives community. I got so much more from that, but in them very early days, I didn't know what else to do. So that's what I done, and to hear you say that and share that experience honestly and vulnerably, I think there'll be a lot of people who can relate to that. Something else you mentioned there was smart recovery. Nobody's ever spoke about smart recovery on the podcast, so you're the first to mention it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about smart recovery and kind of how that fitted into your journey?
Yeah, so Smart Recovery is self-management and recovery training. It's very much a CBT-based model of recovery, and that was what was on offer in the centre at the time. I'm a big fan of Smart Recovery, and it really helped the beginning of my journey. I later became a Smart Facilitator and now deliver groups, so do know a little bit about Smart Recovery. But it's fantastic, what Smart really helped me with in the early days was those tools to change my thinking. So things like being able to sit down and do a cost-benefit analysis, look at some consequences of what's going to happen in my life depending on the choices that I make, some really immediate things that I could draw on when I was craving or having urges. So Smart Recovery massively helped me in the early days with that kind of things. It's absolutely something that I still use in my life today, so can't help longer term. But for me, Smart was in the early days, and I needed a 12-step program to look a bit deeper and to clear the baggage out from my past to help me move on.
Yeah, and I always talk about everything has a purpose at a time, and that's kind of what you're saying, isn't it? Smart Recovery served you at that time, them early days, and then you went on, and 12-step recovery allowed you to go a little bit deeper and really start unpeeling the onion, I like to say, and peeling the layers back. 12-step recovery, how long were you, are you still active 12-step recovery, or do you still go to meetings and stuff or not?
I don't still go to meetings, no. So my children came back in my life and started to live with me again when I was around about 3 years sober. And life just got really, really busy, and I kept it up for a few years. I moved from, prior to COVID, there was online meetings everywhere. So
COVID meetings online?
So even before COVID, there were online meetings. So when I got the children back, I kept going to meetings as much as I could. I did some online meetings as well. And then it turned into just doing online meetings. And I no longer attend fellowship, but if I am ever asked to share or ever asked to go along or do service, then I absolutely would. I still have a big peer connection of people in recovery in my life. So although I don't go to regular meetings, I still have loads of different tools that I use to be able to sustain my recovery and keep up to date with it. Yeah,
and that's I see that as well. That 12-step meetings served me for so long, but I still have loads of people from 12-step recovery. And I think that's the journey. The best bit of that you said, Jen, was 3 years sober. You got your kids back, living with you and stuff. And I think that changes your life again, doesn't it? And priorities change a little bit. And a lot of people talk about still being quite selfish in the early days of recovery, going to lots of meetings, doing lots of recovery, taking care of themselves. And the family's still sometimes neglected, still sometimes, not prioritized. What was it like getting your kids back?
Scary. So I started to see my children when I was about 4 months in recovery, but in the early days, I had supervised access, and my parents used to supervise that access, so I used to see them for 7 hours a week. We went to court when I was about 1.5 years sober, and I got increased access and started to see them overnight. The eldest has additional needs, so it can be quite difficult. And then when I was about 3 years in recovery, my eldest had tried to harm the youngest, and so me and their dad decided to split the children up, and actually it was safer for them to one live with me for a week and the other one live with him, and then every Friday we would swap children. So yeah, that's how it went. And going from being a part-time parent, whereas we used to walk around the woods and collect leaves and do pictures, and to having them full-time, whereas it's homework and routine, and it was scary and it was really difficult. I'd never been that parent that was able to uphold those. When the children lived with me prior to that, there was always alcohol in the background. It was always when I could get my next drink. It was always, that always went through all of my thinking. So to take that away and just be there and be present, it was the most beautiful experience as well. Although it was scary and it was difficult, to reconnect with my children on a level that I'd never connected with them before was just surreal and beautiful. And yeah, although scary, absolutely beautiful experience.
I just kind of stop smiling when you say that. I had similar where COVID came along, and obviously the kids were off school, and I got to look after the kids every day for 2 years. And prior to that, I wasn't all that present in their lives. So yeah, I feel it when you're saying that. All these different things come along at the right time, don't they? Yeah. And I think I'm a firm believer in you're exactly where you need to be in your life, because if you weren't, you would do something about it. Yeah. And I think that's what I have to believe. I have to believe that, and that helps me through my journey. Tell us a little bit about what you do now, Jen. So I mentioned Dot spoke about, yeah. So you clearly work at Recovery Connections. Tell us a little bit about, where you're at now in your recovery journey and what you're doing with yourself.
So I think especially when I've had the space to reminisce about what it was like in the early days, this just seems so surreal. But I'm now Deputy CEO for Recovery Connections. Life looks very different today as what it did nearly 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years this month. And so I'm really new in the role. Deputy CEO is quite a new role. That probably started about 2 to 3 months ago. And I'm just finding my feet in it. So we've got 2 regional managers. So I'm handing what I used to do, all of my workload as a regional manager, I'm handing that to the new regional managers. And I'm in a bit of an unknown space with the Deputy CEO role at the moment. I'm not really sure what it's going to look like. It's going to evolve as it grows and as I hand off the work that I used to do in the more operational work to my 2 colleagues who've now taken on positions as regional managers.
So Deputy CEO now, where did you start with Recovery Connections? Tell us about that journey, because I think this is incredible. So
I started as a volunteer. So because I'd gotten well in Durham, at Durham Recovery and Wellbeing Hub, I had done an ambassador programme there. So I'd become a volunteer there and I'd started to volunteer in a breakfast club. And then I went on to do an ambassador programme, which basically taught me what it was like to work in the field and the skills I would need to know to work in the field. And I volunteered up in Durham for a little while, and Dot was the area manager at the time, so that's how I'd known Dot. And then I heard that Dot moved, and she'd moved to be a CEO down at Recovery Connection. So I rang Dot one day and I said, "Can I come and volunteer for you down there?" And she said, "Yeah, of course you can." So a few days later, off I went. Got the bus on my own to Middlesbrough, which was a huge achievement in itself. Turned up at Hope North East at the time, and just started to spend a little bit of time there at first. I did some training, started to spend a little bit of time there, help out with the groups, and then that led on to me being offered a relief contract. So when people were off sick or on holiday, I would ring people and I would do recovery check-ins with people, and that makes me smile because I was a very different person back then. So there was a worker who's still with Recovery Connections to this day, who used to sit beside me and tell me some of his stories and calm me down and almost talk me into making the phone calls, because picking the phone up and ringing someone to do a recovery check-in was just so scary. I was still petrified at this point of the world. I became a relief worker, and then I went on to be in...
Just in that, It was scary.
It was.
Getting the bus the very first time was scary. Getting the bus to Middlesbrough was scary. Getting there, doing the phone calls was scary. But you still done it, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Like, you've got to do scary things. If you want to progress and you want to not just progress at like you have in your career, but progress in your journey of recovery in life, I think you sometimes got to do scary things. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you is, I've been scared to do stuff, but you know what? I've just done it. We've just been talking outside and you're saying, "Oh, this podcast, I don't know if I want to do it." But you're sitting here and you're doing it. And honestly, like, courage. And I talk about courage all the time because people really think you've got to be confident. You've got to be confident to do stuff. And I'm like, well, you never get confident at doing something until you start. And that's courage, isn't it? And I think that's what you're showing here is, although it's been scary, you've had the courage to put yourself in them situations and just done it anyway.
And the key for me is making sure that although inside I'm trembling and I'm anxious and my heart is beating so fast and my mouth is dry, I put myself in situations where I've got support around me these days, so I feel safe. And as long as I feel safe, I can push myself through to doing anything.
Yeah. So what happened after being a relief worker?
I applied to be a trainee community coach and was actually offered a prehab worker job instead. So the model was changing and we were opening a rehab for the first time. It had never been a rehab. And I was offered a role in order to support people through their journeys on the rehab pathway, so helping them get where they needed to be, attend appointments, work with them, check out their risk, things like that. So I became prehab worker and I absolutely loved it. I will always say that was probably my favourite job at Recovery Connections. It was so much fun. I couldn't believe I was in a job that I was getting paid to basically what felt like having fun with my people.
Yeah. And it's that community, isn't it? It's that's something you feel part of, which is massively important, but also give you purpose, didn't it?
Yeah,
Give you a reason to get up on a morning. Tell us a little bit about what you got from that job.
Definitely a sense of purpose, motivation. You know, I used to jump out of bed every morning. I couldn't drive at the time, so I would get the bus every day to Middlesbrough. And I was always early. Life doesn't look like this these days. But at the time, I was always early. I would always have time to nip in Starbucks and get a coffee and get to work and prepare my day. It definitely gave me a reason to get out of bed. Working with people and seeing them on their journey. So I used to meet people where they were. I used to meet people probably when they were at their rock bottom, and I'd been there and I'd seen it, and that was a constant reminder of where I never wanted to go again. Yes, I was there and help and support others, but that hugely supported me in my recovery journey. You know, it built my confidence from the person that couldn't even sit and pick the phone up to someone that was out and about on the streets, meeting people, going to different services, connecting with other professionals, and help and support people on that pathway. That was huge in my recovery, in my life, in my career.
And I know Recovery Connections have a belief around lived experience, and obviously you were lived experience in that role. How important do you think it was that it was somebody with lived experience supporting somebody else into their recovery journey?
I would say massively. Maybe I'm biased, but I would definitely say massively. You know, what I recognised when I used to go to a service called Draw was, you know, I would see people that had a couple of months of sobriety or a year's sobriety, and I was like, wow, I'm struggling day by day, like literally clinging on for dear life to get through a day without using. How have you done a year? And that shared connection and that support was huge in my journey. So to be able to offer that to other people was massive. I think, you know, to be able to say to people, you know, I was there not that long ago. I was where you are. Come with me. I'll show you that there's a different way. And I just think that is so important for people to be able to hear that and see it and give people hope. Because, you know, when we're in the midst of addiction, we have no hope. We have no hope for a great deal in our lives, let alone betterness, and that life can look different. So to offer someone that hope is really special.
Yeah, so tell us about what come after prehab coach. What was the next step?
Yeah, so I was prehab coach and then I was the rehab. So I was rehab coach, but my job roles kind of used to intermingle. So I was rehab coach while still doing prehab coach. So I used to walk people through. It was a 12-step program in the early days. That's changed now, but it was a 12-step program. So I was a rehab coach, still alongside doing the prehab work. But I would take people through the 12 steps on a one-to-one basis and deliver 12-step lectures. So that was next. And then once I was working towards the end of that person, so I only worked with one person that went through the rehab as a rehab coach. And then I also started to work on the community side of things. So my manager at the time used to call me like the bridge worker to get people into Recovery Connections. So I would work from all of our partners' buildings and I would work with people until they'd attended 3 community meetings. And when they'd attended 3, I'd then hand them over to a community coach. So kind of all 3 of those roles all kind of happened at a similar time.
Yeah. And I love the fact that it was like you see the bridge, isn't it? And I think that's why a lot of people talk about 12-step recovery. It's like a bridge to normal living. But actually, you've got to have a bridge to get there first, don't you? Like, you were the one showing that there's a way, you know, signpost and support and getting people in. And what I love most about this story, like that you've said so far, is the experience you've gotten so far in all of them positions just helps you understand Recovery Connections as it is now. And obviously that allows you to have a much better understanding of everything that's going on. What was after that?
After that, so I got the opportunity to be, I think it was called Sustainable Community Lead at the time. So that was managing the community team. And I got pulled in the office by 2 of the managers at the time. So Dot was one of them. And they offered me the position. And I said, no, thank you. It's like, no, I don't want to be a manager. Why would I want to do that? I love what I do. Anyway, after some discussions, we decided that I would take it on and just see how it went. You know, the thing that Dot has given me most throughout my whole journey is she believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And she held that belief for me, and she walked me through it, and she walked alongside me as I learned how to be a manager. We managed the community team, and oh my goodness, that was so much fun. There was actually, at one point, there was only 2 of us on the community team, and I worked with all ambassadors, volunteers, placements coming in from the uni and the college, and we delivered groups, and we had about 90 people each on our caseload, but it was so much fun. Worked really closely with the rehab manager and helped people transition from community rehab and then back out of rehab into community. And that's really where I learned how to be a manager. That was the start of it all.
How do you be a manager, Jen? What do you think is important when you take that step up to being a manager?
For me, I've had different jobs before. I managed to hold a job down through addiction for 10 years. And I think what I would say about being a manager in my world is very different compared to a lot of other organisations. I think it almost felt a little bit easy when I was a manager in Middlesbrough, because I grew up with everybody around there. We all grew up together. It was a lot of our first jobs, and it automatically came with the respect of the people around me, that Jen's now a manager, I ask for something done and it's just done. But respect is both ways. I would never ask someone to do something that I wasn't willing to do myself. And lead by example. For me, modelling is so important. And some of it I'm still working out. I've done a lot of leadership courses, but every day there's a new challenge that I've never faced before. Something else to learn and grow through.
Yeah, totally. One of my biggest values, and I talk about my values on this all the time because I think it's so important that you live by your values, is be the example you want to see in others. So even if they're not doing it, you still have to, and I think that's the most important thing. And I think from the people I've spoken to in Recovery Connections, that is something that comes through, like, you've done it all. You've done it all, and you still do if you need to. Like, that's the other thing, isn't it? You're not scared just to muck in and roll your sleeves up, step in for somebody who's off, or get involved in groups, get involved in community work. You're still seen in the business or in the charity on the front line if you need to be. How important is that?
For me, I mean, for the organisation and for me personally, I think it's massively important. I think communities have the answers. I'm part of that community. I would hate a job where I wasn't able to still be a part of that. I'll go in and I'll sit and I'll chat with people in the kitchen. I'll deliver a group when I need to. But community have the answers. We always need to have that constant cycle of community telling us what we need to do, where we need to be, how we need to change. So for me, that connection is really important. I never want to be seen as this. Some people do say it, and I really dislike it. Oh, he's the big boss lady. And I always say, please don't call me that. Like, I'm just part of the community. I'm just Jen. That's all I am. We all work together in this organisation, and we all just have different responsibilities. No one's better than, worse than. It's not about being a boss. It's about all being a piece to make the machine run.
Are you the big boss lady?
I don't like to come across like that. The job title might say so,
yeah.
But one of our values is non-hierarchical, because, it's really important for us to be seen. It's really important for us to hear that feedback and still be a part of. It's really important for me in my journey to still feel a part of when I do get the chance to do that.
Yeah, and it's uncomfortable, isn't it? It's uncomfortable to be somebody say that. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, and it's like, where do you think that comes from?
I would probably say there's something to do with some form of authority. So it almost feels authoritarian, and that's just not how we are. Or maybe he's a disciplinarian, and that's just not how we are. We hold the line. I really respect that within Recovery Connections. If something is going on, we deal with it, and we deal with it head on. So we do hold the line, but everything that we do is done with love, care and compassion. A lot of our people have had really bad experiences with authority, and I think if they start to see me as the person with authority, then it breaks down that relationship, and then it doesn't work as well as it should.
Yeah, love, care, compassion.
Yeah.
How important is that?
Massive.
Tell us a little bit about how recovery connection creates that culture of love, care and compassion?
I think it's not always like that, and we try really hard to maintain it. I think coaching is really, really important. So no matter what job role you've got within the organisation, we've all done some level of coaching to be able to have those open, honest conversations with each other. I think if there's an issue within the team, we have a container, we talk about it, what is going on, how have people been affected by it, and how do we move on from that. We have an open door policy. There's no shutting the door and slagging anybody off or having that bitchiness within teams. There's none of that culture that goes on. We just go to the person and we speak to them. A lot of our people, including our staff, have not had a lot of that love, care and compassion. And I truly believe that no matter what you do, no matter what message you're delivering to someone, that can still be done with those three things.
Do you show yourself love, care and compassion?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think I still have to try really hard to do that. I think it's not something that comes easily, if I'm very honest. I think it's one of those things that I take time off work and I review the last however many weeks or months it's been since I've had time off, and I go, oh, I could have done more. Let's put some stuff in place to put some of that back in my life again.
Yeah, and I only ask that question because it's not easy, is it?
No.
It doesn't matter, like you just said, coming up 10 years, but we still have to work at that. And we've said a few times now, you've got to continue working. It's a journey. And it's always them old beliefs, them old things that, took us to addiction. They're still hanging around somewhere, aren't they?
Oh, they're still there. They're absolutely still there. And I think, every now and then something will happen in my life that I think, I need to go and work on that. And I'll put myself back in counselling and I'll have 6 to 12 counselling sessions and I'll go, right, I think I've got that now. Off I go again. For me, that's a really healthy way for me to be able to process things. And it might be another 2 years before something comes up where I feel like I need to do that again. But for me, it is that constant journey, that constant learning. Even though I would class myself as a person that is quite self-aware of what's going on within my own body when I turn up in situations, all of those little demons still play out in the back of my head, and I'll do something, and then maybe a week, 2 weeks, sometimes months later, I'll go, oh, that's what was going on. That's what was playing out for me when I did that. So for me, it's always learning. I always want to learn. I always want to grow as a person.
Yeah, and it's great. That willingness to learn is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell us about the next step on the ladder for you.
Next step. So after I was the community manager in Middlesbrough, I moved to being the community manager over Middlesbrough and Gateshead at the same time. Gateshead came with its own challenges, and I'll always say Gateshead was probably where I learnt much more skill. Middlesbrough came a little bit easier because I came with the respect, because people had seen me come through the ranks almost and grow into what I was. Gateshead, I went in there as a manager, and so I was always seen as a manager. People hadn't really seen me grow. People didn't really know who I was before I went there. And so that came with definitely with its challenges. So I did both, and Gateshead was very different. The communities were different, the staff were different. It was a whole learning journey. For the first 3 months, I probably cried almost every day coming home thinking, what have I done? Like, I don't know how to be this manager that they need me to be. I know how to be the manager Middlesbrough need me to be, but I don't know how to be that person. But I learned quickly. And it wasn't so bad after all. It was a great team. There was just a lot of change that we needed to implement, and everybody dislikes change, don't they? Most people will dislike change. And so there was a lot of change to happen in Gateshead when I first went there.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for anybody in life generally. Change is difficult. For those in recovery, it can be much more difficult because we just get set in, and we find a new comfort zone a little bit, and then something changes again, and that's difficult for people. How do you manage change? How do you manage change?
Process, talk a lot, plan. And you know what? Even when things seem scary or you're not sure what you're doing, you put one foot in front of the other and you do it anyway, because I just feel like I have trust and faith that things work out as they're meant to do. sometimes it's as simple as if I just show up and work through it, we'll work it out together and it'll all be okay.
Yeah, and it's just have faith, isn't it? Like, that's what I'm hearing there. Have faith that it's going to be all right. Yeah, and something I have to believe in my recovery now is it doesn't matter what you throw at us, I'll get through it. And I think that's massively important for me, and I've just got to have that belief all the time. What was next?
So Gateshead Service Manager was next. So I had the option to go back to Middlesbrough as the community manager in Middlesbrough or move to Gateshead as the service manager. So I was Gateshead Service Manager, and a week into that role, it might not have even been a week, it wasn't very long into that role, a service manager from our partners came and got me and said, right, we're going for a BCP meeting. So I was okay. So I'm following this lady down the corridor as she's talking about this BCP meeting. And before we entered the room where we went in, I said, what's a BCP meeting? And she was like, oh, business continuation plan. I was like, right, okay. So I just showed up in that meeting, had no idea what I was doing. Again, all of those challenges right from the off. So Gateshead Service Manager was next. And in that role, I got to also oversee the rehab. So I'd quite often, like in my previous management roles, it had been the community element I'd looked after. So this is where I learnt more about a little bit more structure, a little bit more, so a lot around CQC. So although the Gateshead Rehab wasn't CQC registered, it followed the same format as our CQC registered one in Middlesbrough. So that came with its challenges, but again, just showing up and working through it and asking the questions, daring to ask those questions of what does that mean, what does that look like, and how do I tackle that with the support of peers and colleagues around me was hugely important.
Yeah, and honestly, it is amazing, the journey and the willingness to learn, the willingness to ask questions, the courage just to show up. They're all so valuable lessons for people that, really need to hear. Yeah. And again, I'll say it again, hope. It's so important, isn't it? That if you can go from, scared to get on the bus, getting on the bus for your support work, and now you're Gateshead Service Manager, that's quite a journey in itself, but you haven't stopped there yet, have you, Jen? What's next?
No.
Tell us what's next.
What's next? So there was a regional manager in post and he'd taken a secondment, so he was only going to be around 1 day a week. So I was offered a post to step into the regional manager role and oversee the operations for the whole organisation. He was going to be there 1 day a week, so he would provide the support, the CEO would provide the support. And so, went to the regional manager, and that was probably the scariest transition, because all of a sudden, stepping into service manager felt responsible, because this was now my service, that anything was my responsibility and I was accountable for it. But then stepping into the regional position, that just took that fear to a whole new level, I think. And I would say that's probably where I learned to juggle a lot of different things at the same time. So in our organisation, it's complex, and there can be 10 fires to put out at any one time, and you just have to learn to manage and put the right people on the right fires to put them out. Great fun, and that's the role that I've only just left. Definitely sad to leave that one behind. It was an amazing role. I learned so much.
Throughout all of these, step-ups, progressions, promotions, how have you managed to keep yourself well? What's been important for you to maintain through all that journey? Or not even maintained, Jen. What's been like the process? Because I imagine as you've went through that journey, the way you've looked after yourself has changed also. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that journey of just looking after Jen.
Because in the early days, it was very much still get to my meetings, focus on my recovery, and then life got bigger and priorities had to change. My children had to take a priority, and I needed to start and put different things in my life that helped keep me well, and that's absolutely changed over the last 10 years. I think we've been through lots of different phases where I've came up with these really great ideas of putting stuff in my life, and quite often they'll not be sustainable, or they just don't fit. And sometimes when you have an idea, that's something, it's a great idea, so you go and do it. Like, I want to climb Rosebery Top and twice a week for the next 10 years. Yeah, like those kind of ideas that you start off doing it and it's great at first, but actually it's not very sustainable. So I've been through a lot of different changes. I think today what life looks like is anything where I can get peace and quiet. Nature is my absolute go-to. Time, still connections with people that are still in 12-step fellowship. Connection with people is hugely important. I have a very close-knit circle of friends, so time with them is very important. Reconnecting with my family over my whole journey has been phenomenal. It's been amazing. And I now know my family on a level that I never knew them before. So time with my family, making sure that I've got the stuff in my life that feeds my soul. You know, work does feed my soul, but it also can take up a lot of my time. So time with my children, exercise, making sure that I'm well fed, well looked after, and time with those really important people in my life is really important.
And I normally ask what's the 3 to 5 things in your toolkit, and that's kind of what you've just told us, isn't it? So I'm going to switch it up a little bit. What would advice, or what would you recommend somebody tries in their early days of recovery? What would be 3 things you would tell them that's really important that they try and have in their life in their early recovery?
That's a really difficult one because I just want to say everything. You know what? I'm a huge advocate for multiple pathways to recovery. You know, what works for me won't work for you, and the exact same for the next person that comes along. So I think try it all. And I still use to these days smart tools, 12-step tools, and lots of other tools that I learned along the way. Mindfulness is a huge part of my life, meditation, and making sure that I've got time for those things. So for me, it's not what 3 things to try. It's go out there and try everything, you know, have a try at life again. See what fits, keep what fits, and drop what doesn't fit. Make sure that you've got those peer connections because that's hugely important. You know, my thinking can still be off. Checking that out with somebody else who's got thinking similar to me, or even just saying it out loud can actually change the way that I perceive something. So try everything and create your own plan. For me, that's what recovery's about. Putting in our lives what's really important to us, what gives us meaning and purpose in our lives.
Yeah. So 10 years ago, more or less, entered recovery. Life very different now. What's possible in the next 10 years?
I have no idea. And, you know, I used to be the person that would plan that stuff. I'll have a year plan, a 3-year plan, and a 5-year plan. And you know what? I live life as see what comes along. I'm very happy with life today. You know, that doesn't mean to say that life doesn't come with its challenges, because it absolutely does. Life's not always easy. But I know if I put one step in front of the other, the right thing will fall in place at the right time, and that'll be exactly where I'm meant to be.
Yeah, amazing. Jen, appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on. And for me, that whole story and journey that you've just shared with us is just incredible, you know. And I think whether you show yourself enough love, care and compassion or not, I think you just need to give yourself a pat on the back for how far you've come and what you do now, because you're just a real example of what's possible. And, you know, I think that a lot of people will take a lot from this conversation. So thank you for having the courage to drive to Newcastle and do it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Recovery Toolkit podcast. If you took something positive from it, then why not subscribe? If you or somebody you know has been suffering gambling-related harm, why not head over to our website where you can join our community? The link is in the show notes.